I swear it's not my fault we're late. I'm blaming Dean for this.
I would agree, yes.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to your friendly neighborhood atheist. I'm your host, Ethan Micheal, and tonight we are debating the Kalam cosmological argument. We all know it is a personal favorite of my dear friend, Dean Meadows, the Christian who will be defending that position, and his opponent, Jim Barrows. Jim, how you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Looking forward to this.
Awesome. So Dean's been on my channel before, so everybody knows who he is. So he doesn't need an introduction. He's the daily apologist. But Jim, if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
I'm on a mildly popular atheist show called The Atheist Experience. Some of you may have heard it or heard of it. And I'm also on a couple other shows from the ACA. Been an atheist for a number of years and just recently got involved in the ACA shows and the ACA itself a couple years ago. So that's about it for me on that side of the house.
Yeah, I've come to be a fan of yours, which is why I reached out and was like, dude, this guy's got a debate. He's pretty good. And it's my understanding that not only is it your first official debate, but first virtual debate, but you're also your first official debate. So I'm taking your debate cherry tonight.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sweet.
He's taking all your thunder.
That's okay. Take the thunder away. Dean, before we get this party started, is there anything you'd like to let the audience know about you?
Well, my name is Dean Meadows. Most of the audience has seen me on this channel before. I'm the executive director of the Daily Apologist, the husband of Hillary Micheal, and the father of Ren and Nora. And I appreciate these conversations, and I appreciate Ethan hosting these types of conversations. I want to thank Jim for dialoguing this evening as well.
Of course. And I was taking bets beforehand on if Dean will be convincing me that the Kalam cosmological is a sound argument for the existence of God. So without further ado, gentlemen, are you ready to go?
Let's go. Ready to go.
Dean, do you have all the power? Is your Ethernet hooked up?
What's the Ethernet?
I still even have his laptop charger.
Yeah, you're right.
All right, Dean, you're getting a little bit of extra shit from me tonight.
That's fine. I'm a Gen X trapped in a millennial's body. That's not a software engineer.
All right, Dean, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, the clock is started. The floor is yours, my friend.
All right. Well, hey, once again, I want to thank Ethan and Jim for this opportunity to come on here and discuss, I think, one of the most important arguments for the existence of God, the Kalam cosmological argument. So tonight, I'm going to defend the following proposition, that the Kalam cosmological argument is a sound argument for the existence of God in general. I'm not here tonight to defend older New Testament ethics, the resurrection, inerrancy, inspiration of Scripture. While these are interesting topics, they're simply outside the scope of tonight's dialogue. So I'm simply going to utilize standard scientific evidence presented over the last century, and then I'll use some philosophical arguments to back up the Kalam as well. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Kalam, it's set up in the following way. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Premise 3, therefore the universe has a cause. Now this argument is formally valid, and therefore if each premise is true, then the argument is sound. And so what I have to do tonight is I have to show that each premise is true. And I believe if I do that, I will carry the debate tonight. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at premise 1. Premise 1 states that whatever begins to exist has a cause. And so in order to eliminate some charges of equivocation, I want to be very specific in some of the terms that I'm defining. So by begins to exist, I mean the following: that X begins to exist at T if and only if X begins at T and comes into being at t, and if X exists at t and the actual world includes no state of affairs in which X exists timelessly. Number 2, t is either the first time at which X exists or is separated by an interval during which X does not exist. And 3, X's existence is a tense fact. Now, I know that's a technical definition, so let me try and simplify it. For instance, for the sake of argument, let's say that my birthday marks the time when I began to exist, and there was no state of affairs in which I existed timelessly, and that date was the day that I existed, and my existence is a tensed fact. All right, so that's what I mean by begins to exist. Also, by cause, I simply mean an efficient cause, what Aristotle defines as that which brings about an effect. That's different than the stuff of which something is made out of. So the other piece of the puzzle here for premise 1, now to define some terms, is I believe that the first premise is grounded in the fundamental metaphysical principle that something cannot come into being from nothing. Aristotle once famously said, out of nothing, nothing comes, and this seems to be true. While nothing serves as a pronoun in the philosophical sense, it's a universal qualifier or quantifier. It means no thing. Therefore, no thing can come, or something cannot come from no thing. Now, some atheists, and I don't know if Jim's going to go down this line or not. I don't mean to straw man, but I'm just laying out some possibilities here. Now, some atheists may suggest that fluctuating energy in the quantum vacuum that produces these virtual particles counts as something from nothing. But I think that's a little bit ridiculous, because the quantum vacuum is not no thing, and it's governed by certain physical laws. And then another common objection that some atheists might make is that the idea that since we can't test for no thing, we don't know whether or not the universe could come into existence from it. Well, once again, I think that's a little absurd, because if no thing has no properties, it's metaphysically impossible for no thing to do anything at all. And so thus, I think it would lead to justifying the first premise. So why think that we could observe, or why think what we observe in the universe would apply to the universe in general? Well, that extrapolation, given the first premise, is based on inductive reasoning of our real-world scientific observations. Now, barring any reason to think that we should make such an extrapolation, we are more we are rational to make that inductive leap, so to speak. If all of our observations follow pattern X, we ought to expect that pattern to hold for things that we don't observe. The only way to justify not making that extrapolation is to identify a difference between what has been observed and what is being extrapolated, and explain why the difference ought to lead us to expected deviation from pattern X. With that final step, without that final step, it's unreasonable to reject the extrapolation. So it seems then the first premise is more plausibly true than not. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn to defending premise 2. Premise 2 states that the universe began to exist. So here I'd like to offer 2 pieces of scientific evidence and then a philosophical argument to support the second premise. The first piece of scientific evidence that I'd like to present stems from the second law of thermodynamics, which states in a closed system, entropy never decreases, and the system moves towards a state of equilibrium in which the universe will experience what's called heat death. It'll be cold, it'll be dark, it'll be dilute. And so all observable evidence suggests that the universe is a closed system and is slowly moving towards equilibrium. Now, this raises a question. If the universe has been around for an infinite amount of time, why hasn't it already reached equilibrium? Why hasn't it already experienced heat death? Why is it not already cold, dark, and dilute? And on this point, Paul Davies, an agnostic cosmologist, states, the universe can't have existed forever. We know it must have had a beginning at a finite time ago. So the other piece of scientific evidence that I like to point to comes from the expansion of the universe. The standard model, or the Big Bang cosmological model, implies that the universe was not infinite in the past, but rather had a beginning a finite time ago. Now, since the inception of the standard model, other models have been proposed, like steady state models, cyclical models, quantum loop models, but they all are unsuccessful in avoiding a beginning. On this point, agnostic cosmologist Alexander Valencia notes there are no current models at this time that give a satisfactory accounting for a universe without a beginning. Now, some atheists, as I pointed out in the defense of the first premise, want to appeal to quantum mechanics, but in 2003, Arvin Board, Alan Guth, and Alexander Valencia were able to show that any universe which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion through its history cannot be infinite in the past. Thus, the current cosmology of the universe of classical space-time cannot be extended infinitely in the past, but must have a boundary. Now, Valencia also notes that there's either something beyond the boundary or there isn't. And if there is a non-classical description of reality, then Valencia states, well, then that is simply the beginning of the universe, and that cannot exist timelessly as well. As Anthony Aguiar and John Chiesas says in their 2013 paper, Quantum Instability in the Emergence of the Universe, they say, it is very difficult to devise a system, especially a quantum one, that does nothing forever and then evolves. A truly stationary or periodic quantum state which would last forever would never evolve, whereas one with any instability would not endure for an indefinite time. So even if we can describe what happens beyond Planck time via quantum mechanics, it's merely a more fundamental description of the universe in which the quantum region itself must have a beginning. So furthermore, I propose that an actual infinite, this is my philosophical argument, an actual infinite number of temporal events is impossible and cannot be instantiated in the real world. And so I'll offer one argument there, and that's Hilbert's Hotel, which is an illustration created by German mathematician David Hilbert. And so Hilbert imagines an ordinary hotel with an infinite number of rooms, in which all the rooms are filled. Now, if a new guest desires to check in, the manager of the hotel would say, sorry, all rooms are full, ending the possibility of the guest coming in. But now imagine the hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and let's suppose once again that all the rooms are full. There's not a single vacancy throughout the hotel, and every room has someone in it. What if a new guest shows up and asks for a room? The manager says, no problem, and moves all the occupants from room 1 to room 2, and the person staying in 2 to 3, and so on into infinity. As a result, room 1 becomes available, and the new guest checks in. But before he arrived, all the rooms were really full. And so that seems to be a metaphysical absurdity. So we've looked at premise 1, we've looked at premise 2. Well, let me go back and comment something here on Hilbert's Hotel. If this scenario, now this is the point that I want to make. Now, while this scenario with regards to the infinity, while it might be logically coherent, it can't actually take place in the real world. And if Jim thinks it can, then I hope that Jim and some members of the ACA take out a large sum of money, erect a hotel, and empirically demonstrate that that scenario can take place in real time. So with premise 1 and premise 2 defended, the third premise states, therefore, a universe has a cause, and this is the logical progression from the first two premises of the argument. Here we move into the realm of conceptual analysis, and we ask the question, what then are the attributes of the first cause? Now, given that prior to the beginning of the universe, there were no initial operating conditions by which the laws of physics could work, it follows then that the cause must be personal. Furthermore, if the universe began to exist, then time, space, and matter had a beginning as well. Thus, the first cause must be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. Only two things fall into that category, and that would be things like abstract objects, like numbers, which cannot bring anything into existence. And so the only other thing that's left in that category would be unembodied minds. Thus, the only option left on the table is an unembodied mind who's characterized as the traditional theistic God. And so that is the defense of the Kalam cosmological argument. So in closing, if Jim's to carry the debate tonight, he can't simply point out mere possibilities of how to avoid the premises of the Kalam, but he must demonstrate that one or both of the premises are more likely false than true. Now, in order to do that, he cannot simply say, I'm not convinced of the argument, but also has to provide an alternative to support the position that the Kalam premises, one or both of them, is false. If he can't do that tonight, then those who are serious about truth should consider the Kalam cosmological argument to be sound.
You've got about a minute left. Did you want to forego that time?
Yeah, I'll give Jim a minute.
Awesome.
Okay.
Jim,
I'm going to need it.
whenever you're ready.
Okay. So let me start by saying that I have the utmost respect for my interlocutor, and this isn't the normal showing of respect for one's interlocutor, though. I have absolutely no respect whatsoever for the Kalam cosmological argument, putting it either as the most or second most ridiculous argument for God ever presented. This does not mean the proponents of this argument are ridiculous or insane for supporting it. And this is going to be sometimes a hard line to keep, showing disdain for the argument while showing genuine respect I have for my opponent. I ask him in advance to forgive any errors I may make. So what is the Kalam cosmological argument? It is, as Dean said, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Notice, it doesn't get us to a God. It doesn't even eliminate natural causes or postulate them either. It doesn't say anything about what that cause is. If the premises are true, then the conclusion is really kind of like saying the chicken crossed the road. It's a nothing burger. And no, I don't have to come up with an alternative. I simply have to point out how the argument fails to meet its burden of proof. So that's all I'm really going to focus on tonight, is that there is not enough proof, not enough evidence, and that is the only thing that matters. Philosophical arguments don't make a difference. It's evidence, it's science. So let's start with premise one. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. This is problematic from the jump. It assumes we know everything about the universe when we know really so little. We don't know what everything in the universe is or how it came to be. It makes an absolute statement, and you only need one black swan to disprove it. The reductio ad absurdum argument in support of this premise runs something like this. If false, it would be inexplicable why anything and everything does not randomly appear into existence without a cause. That's literally the argument from incredulity, which is formally defined as the fallacy lies in the unstated premise. If a state of affairs is impossible to imagine, it doesn't follow that it is false. It may only mean that imagination is limited. Moreover, if no one has yet managed to how a state of affairs is possible, it doesn't follow that no one will ever be able to. If there is positive evidence for the conclusion, then of course we have other reasons for accepting it. But a lack of proof, it is true, is not proof, it is false. Where proof means the cogency of evidence that compels acceptance of a truth, or the process of establishing the validity of a statement by derivation from other statements in accordance with principles of reasoning. Forbidding this type of reasoning is not the same as a reasonable presumption, such as the presumption of no guilt in court, like this. Any proposition like there is X is reasonably presumed false, not argued false, just presumed false, taken for granted, unless proven true. This is the basic principle of logic, since the burden of proof can never be shifted to the negation in any case. As for things popping into existence without a cause, the quantum world appears to have that very thing happen. Quantum particles appear to pop into existence without a cause. Quantum mechanics wreaks havoc on the normal scientific paradigm of observe, measure, and repeat. And if you're wondering why bicycles and sofas don't pop into existence, they're not quantum particles. The inductive reasoning defense runs something like both common experience and scientific evidence, which constantly verifies and never falsifies the truth of the first premise. Science constantly does verify theories like evolution, gravity, and disease. There are areas of those theories that are still being worked on now. Science that constantly verifies anything is subject to definition. Tell me what you think science is constantly verifying, and I'll tell you if I agree. As a general statement, it's simply not true. Science is constantly finding out new things. Quantum mechanics doesn't verify the first premise. In addition, the physics of a black hole past the event horizon may also falsify the first premise. We also don't know anything about the physics of the Big Bang past Planck time. That may as well completely disprove the first premise. Making claims that have absolutes in them is always dangerous because they're always subject to a single piece of evidence to the contrary. In this case, science has come a long way to understanding how the universe works, especially in the quantum world. Another defense of this premise is ex nihilo nihil fit, or something cannot come into being from nothing. The first problem is defining nothing. At one point in the history of human knowledge, anything outside of our atmosphere was considered nothing. They weren't right then. Physicists then looked at the nothingness of space and said, nope, there's something there, the quantum world. Throughout history, philosophers and theologians have been redefining nothing, and scientists have found out it's not quite the nothing they thought it was. Isn't much more likely that the physicists are much more accurately able to describe how the world works than theologians, philosophers, or YouTube debaters, and I'm including myself in that. In fact, Lawrence Krauss wrote a book for us non-physicists on exactly how nothing is unstable and must produce something. This isn't just what it seems science. Let me skip that. I should have. A lot of work needs to be given to give that theory, that hypothesis the same gravitas, excuse the pun, to say evolution of gravity. If this hypothesis is correct, though, nothing has to produce something. As to the William Lane Craig charge, that it seems to me that to attack the first premise would simply expose one as a person who isn't really sincere about finding out the truth about reality, but is just looking for an academic refutation of the argument, just looking for any sort of loophole to try to escape the conclusion. I'm not making that claim. I'm simply asking for proof of the existence of the nothing you claim exists. Show your math or your experiments or any other evidence you have. Simply claiming something can't come from nothing is not enough. It's simply an argument from ignorance. Philosophers and theologians arguing for nothing in which there's no potential to create something, or that which only God can create something from, need to prove that nothing exists. That evidence is not only profoundly lacking, but evidence to the contrary exists for any practical and demonstrable nothing. In addition, there is no nothing from which something comes in the current Big Bang model, or one of the original Big Bang models. Could it be a singularity? It could be a bouncing model. And we don't know if we can even get rid of the quantum foam. So guess what? That is still not nothing. That is something. And so the argument is that something came from nothing is purely philosophical and doesn't really reflect the current understanding of science, which is we don't know. As to the universe having a beginning, that might not be true as we currently think it is. A theory called of conformal cyclic conformity. In this case, the universe is eternal. Just our current universe started in the last expansion. In the paper, Apparent Evidence for Hawking Points in the CMB Sky, they proposed to have found actual evidence for a preceding Big Bang in the cosmic microwave background. Whether this is definitive proof or not still remains to be seen. However, should this anomalous data in the CMB prove to be an echo of a previous universe, it would put a damper on the claim that the universe has a beginning as the way theologians and philosophers mean it. Claiming the universe has a beginning may very well have as its cause a preceding universe collapse. No God needed there. What then caused the preceding universe's creation? We don't know. We don't know for certain that there was one. The best answer to the question, was the universe created, is it appears to be the case, according to the evidence we have. Anything more requires evidence. Finally, quantum physics has shown that particles do pop in and out of existence without apparent cause. Things do begin to exist for any demonstrable existence from a demonstrable nothing. Claims to the contrary need to be demonstrated. And yes, we need more evidence to even prove those claims. This premise is the argument from incredulity fallacy and an argument from ignorance all rolled into one. In essence, it says that the universe cannot pop into existence from nothing, yet we're not sure nothing can exist, or that if it does in a way that isn't inherently unstable. There's so much to learn about the universe, and as much as we learned since 1979, much less the 1600s, that the existence of a flock of black swans on this topic seems inevitable. The second premise, the universe began to exist. So William Lane Craig and others spend quite a bit of time dealing with infinite regresses and doing math with infinity to prove the universe cannot be infinite. Here's the problem. This is not evidence. We have no evidence that infinite regresses are possible or impossible. It's just philosophical masturbation. Here's 2 infinite regresses for you as an illustration of the uselessness of this line of thinking. Hold your hand and shoulder width apart and clap them together. Now, in order for that to happen, the right hand has to go halfway there. To get to that halfway point, it has to go halfway there. In order to get to any point on the distance, the right hand has to travel to the halfway point. Specifically, an infinite number of halfway points. You can never stop dividing by 2 after all. The second example is even funnier. In order to clap your hands together, it takes a finite amount of time. At some point, your hand will have to have spent half its time moving. I'll leave it as an exercise reader as to how many halfway there moments there are. A defense for this premise is also the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics states that the total entropy of an isolated system can never decrease over time and is constant if and only if all processes are reversible. Isolated systems spontaneously evolve towards thermodynamic equilibrium, the state with maximum entropy. The first problem is that we're assuming that the universe is in fact an isolated system. We don't know this. While it appears to be that way, it may not be. We just don't know. The second problem with this is that the current model of the Big Bang does not violate this principle. The current model is that all of space-time was included in the expansion, and as such, energy was not created or destroyed, thus no violation occurred. The third problem with this argument is that it might not apply at the quantum level, or at least not in the way we layfolk would expect. As such, if the universe started as some sort of quantum fluctuation, this might not even apply or apply in unexpected ways. The fourth is that our understanding of physics stops well into the early expansion phase of space-time. Does the second law even apply that early? We simply don't know, because we don't know enough about the physics of the early existence of space-time. We simply don't have enough evidence to show that the beginning of space-time violates or obeys the second law of thermodynamics as we understand it today. Fun math games and appeals to scientific laws don't help with this premise. We don't understand enough about the workings of the universe prior to Planck time or the universe itself to know if the laws of physics can even describe the universe accurately in all situations. Once again, we can see a whole flock of black swans that could easily derail this premise as well. Conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause, and well, here we are at a conclusion that is at best barely supported by our current understanding of how the universe works, at worst in direct contradiction to how the universe works, depending on current and future scientific understanding. We can ask which universe, the one we're currently experiencing, the one that may have come before, or the one that comes after, do before and after have any meaning at all when we discuss things that exist outside of our current space-time? If the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. However, the conclusion can only be as true as the premises are. The premises are far from 100% true, and so the conclusion is less than 100% true, which means that it's simply false, because this is not a syllogism in a form that allows for partially true premises. All we need is one black swan in any of the premises, and we have flocks of black swans all giving us cause to doubt the absolute truth of the premises. As such, the conclusion does not hold. But let's assume that the Kalam is true, that the universe in whatever shape scientists tells us it takes has an intelligent creator. Where do we go from there? Does that mean the Christian God is that creator? I propose the intelligent creator is the crab god. Why a crab? Well, at least 5 different species have ended up as crab-like creatures, so that's kind of cool. Let's face it, the anthropomorphic god has been done to death. If we're going to create a god of our minds, we should at least be creative. Sadly, this is as creative as I get. And that is it for me.
Oh, okay, cool. So you see the rest of your time?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, my cat just wants to say hi. He keeps
Hi, cat.
coming up here, being a pain in the butt. Anyways, so real quick, there is a clarifying question. So before we get into freeform dialogue, if the audience has any questions, just tag YFNA Atheist, and I will ask them, ask either of the opponents. But Jim, if you could clarify from Aaron Johnson, nothing is, quote, unstable. How can the absence of anything have any properties? It sounds like this is talking about something and calling it nothing.
Right. And that's kind of the problem that I was talking about, is that we need a definition of nothing. And if you, to use the example from Krauss, if you take a box and you take it out far enough away that there's no gravity, and you make it so that there's no atoms, nothing inside of it, and then you also make it so that there's no solar radiation, electronic radiation, there's nothing in it, you still have the quantum. And that is what is unstable, is the quantum foam there. That's the hypothesis that Krauss points out, that even if you get as close to nothing as you can, we don't appear to be able to eliminate the quantum foam. And that is just, and so that is what is unstable. And that is kind of my point, is that nothing does not seem to exist. It is a philosophical concept that has no analog that I have found a physicist willing to actually point to and say, yeah, that's kind of close, other than Krauss's example, and then a couple other things that don't really sound like nothing either.
Thank you. That actually helps me out a little bit, because I've always been confused when they say, like, physicists, when they say nothing, they mean something else. So that helps me out a little bit. Dean.
Yeah, they usually mean a number so close to zero that it only matters to a physicist.
All right, the free-form dialogue can begin now. I'll only interject if there's clarifying questions from the audience. If not, we'll get to the audience questions towards the end.
Right. So since I got the first opening statement, I'll give Jim the first opportunity to, I guess, semi-cross-examine or whatnot, if he wants to.
Yeah, so you were talking about, and I didn't take as good a notes as I really wanted to, observational patterns. Could you kind of go into that a little bit? Because that was, I believe, other than your statement that I have to come up with an alternative, which I was violently shaking my head because I violently disagree. I just have to show that your premises are not true.
Yeah, well, I'll get to that in a second, because it kind of goes along with what we're talking about. So I basically said, one of the objections that's often raised to the first premise, whatever begins to exist has a cause, is that, well, this might take place inside of the universe, but it wouldn't hold for the universe itself. And all I said was that this extrapolation that this would apply to the universe is based upon inductive reasoning that is grounded in our real world scientific observations. And so I then said, barring any reason to think that we should not make such an extrapolation, we're more than rational in making it. So let me give an example. So if all of our observations follow X pattern, right, then we ought to expect that the pattern would hold for things that we don't observe, right? The only way to justify for not making that extrapolation is to identify a difference between what has been observed and what is being extrapolated, and explain why the difference ought to lead us to expect a deviation from the pattern. So without that final step, it seems unreasonable to reject that extrapolation. So a practical. Well, go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, I would point out that the quantum world seems to throw some of what you just said on its ear, that we can't always expect things that we observe to happen every time. Quantum realm seems to, I use realm, and I probably should use foam or whatever the cool scientists are using these days. But
whatever they say in Marvel.
Yeah. That there is quite a bit of probability involved. So we can't have completely 100% repeatable observations. And we can't discount the quantum world, right? Or the quantum foam at all. So that would be my first kind of counterpoint to what you just said. And that, and also that there are places where we don't understand the physics, right? Planck time, black holes, there may be a couple others that I'm unaware of that we don't understand the physics. So again, we have holes in what you just said, right? Two pretty big ones, I think.
So I would respond to that by saying, number one, there are probably 10 different interpretations of quantum mechanics. Some
Yes.
of those are interdeterministic, some of those are deterministic. And so right now the science hasn't even come up with a theory that reconciles classic space-time with quantum gravity. So I don't know that
You just made my point.
well, my point is that with regards to that, I don't think we're even at a point to even say that point that I made that doesn't hold, because we don't yet know enough about quantum gravity to say whether or not it violates. I mean, I don't think that it would violate the first premise there. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. As I said before, Vilenkin even says that even if
we don't know
that boundary,
we don't know
even
that,
if there's
right?
something beyond that boundary,
But you just
then
admitted
it's simply
that we don't
that
have,
is the beginning of the universe.
but you just admitted that we have huge gaps in our knowledge about how the universe works. So how can we state that with the degree of certain, with that 100% degree of certainty you
Right.
need for the first
You're
premise?
discounting. You're discounting premise one on the basis of quantum mechanics. What I'm simply saying
That's one of the things I'm basing it on. I'm basing it on the fact that we don't have the evidence to support it to the degree needed to assume that it's true.
Right. We don't have the evidence to support the idea based upon, I mean, let's look at my statement. I'll just pull my statement up. My statement says, barring reasons to think that we shouldn't make the extrapolation that whatever begins to exist has a cause, we're more than rational in making it. So my point is,
if we don't have the evidence,
unless quantum mechanics gives us good reason to abandon that premise, then we're well within our rights to hold to that premise. That's what I mean.
It sounds like you're
talking about
saying
these different interpretations of quantum mechanics.
All right. So it sounds like to me what you're saying is that we don't need evidence to accept things as true.
No, I didn't. I'm not saying
if we don't have the evidence to support P1, right? Because what you said,
Jim,
we don't have that evidence.
Jim, we have.
Then how do we accept it as true?
Okay, we have observable evidence that when things come into being, there's a cause. I think that is a pattern that we see every day.
Quantum foam. Some scientists say we don't. That's a problem with your statement because we don't have consensus.
You're missing my point, Jim. My point is, here's the observable data that we currently have. Let's just for a second, let's put quantum realm to the side, okay? As we observe the way that nature works, in our everyday experience, scientific observations, we see a consistent pattern that things that come into being have causes. Now, unless there's something within the quantum realm that shows us that we should disregard that, we're well within our rights. Hold up. We're well within our rights to continue to hold that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Right. So we have a massive amount of evidence from, at least 1900 with the Big Bang model that says things that begin to exist have a cause. Now, in order for you to undercut that, you need to give me evidence as to why I shouldn't hold that premise based upon the quantum world. You can't just say...
Because there are areas of science that we don't understand, ignoring, like you wanted to, for whatever reason, the quantum realm, right? We don't know everything that happens because our understanding of physics breaks down at black holes.
But just because we don't know everything, Jim, doesn't mean we can't know that things are more probably true or plausibly true.
All we need is one black swan to prove it false.
Right. Okay. So do you have a black swan that shows?
I don't have to. I just have to. I'm just pointing out that we can't have 100% confidence in the first premise.
Well, if that's the way that you're going to go, then you can just say, well, we can have potentially a black swan for everything that we know.
Well, if this was an inductive argument, I'd be having a completely different line of attack on this. But what we have, right, is a deductive argument, and so the first premise must be proved true. And we can't do that. We can't prove it true.
So you're saying then that unless we have some scenario where there's 100% certainty, because you said earlier that the premises must be 100% true, or else they're false.
For a deductive argument, yes.
No, they just have to be more plausibly true than their negation. That's logic 101. They don't have to be 100% certain. There's nothing. I mean, would you say that there's anything outside of your existence from your vantage point? How many things are you 100% certain about with regards to what goes on in the world?
Nothing.
All right. So, but you are reasonably, when you look at the world, you will say, you might say, I'm not 100% certain about that, but that thing right there in nature is more probably true than not.
Right, but I would never base a deductive
So
argument
that's
on
what I would
that.
say for whatever begins to exist has a cause. I'm not 100% certain. There could be some scientific data that comes along and completely undercuts it. But until I see that scientific data, I'm well within my rights to be rational and say that's probably that's more plausibly true than its negation, because there's no evidence to completely to undercut it. And let me get a chance to ask a question, shift a little bit. You said earlier, with regards to this topic, that philosophical arguments don't matter.
That's correct.
So was your opening statement a philosophical argument or a scientific argument?
So
was it
clarify,
underpinned by philosophy?
No, specifically is that we need evidence for this argument, that purely more philosophical arguments are not going to suffice.
So I guess that's interesting. Why are philosophical arguments not good in showing something like the impossibility of an infinite regress? Why am I not well within my rights to provide that?
Oh, well, so here's an infinite regress. There's an infinite number of points between my two hands.
Okay,
there's an infinite number of points. Okay. So because there's no evidence for it or against it, right? We can't draw that conclusion. And what we're talking about with the Kalam in particular is physical properties of the universe. And so what we need is evidence from physical properties of the universe. So the philosophical arguments don't matter because they aren't evidence. They aren't evidence of the physical world.
So when we come to things like, and I think this is a key indicator, I think, of where we might be off here as far as your position and my position with regards to that. You have stated, one second, I'm trying to pull this up.
Ethan, you're on mute.
Crap. Just a reminder, do your best, guys, not to talk over each other, because when you do start talking over each other, it gets muffled and the audience can't hear what you're saying.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha. So Jim, you just clapped your hands and you said that that's an infinite regress.
Well, it's an infinite number of points. I misspoke slightly. It's an infinite number of points.
So
I can continue to divide by 2 until infinite and never stop, right?
So from here to here, is that a line?
Yes, and there's an infinite number of points on that line.
But wouldn't you say that it might be true that a line is possibly divided like here and here and here, but it doesn't follow that there is a place where that line is possibly divided, because a line is not a composition of points. Right.
Well, my hand
the
has
line
to move
is logically prior to the points, right?
Right. But in order for my hands to move, they have to move across they have to get to the halfway point. Before it gets to the halfway point, it's got to get to the quarter point, and then the 8th point, the 16th, the 32nd, and so on and so forth. Correct?
But you're saying that a line is a composition of points, but the line itself is logically prior to the points that you're pointing out. So to assume that a line is a composition of points is to beg the question towards an infinite regress.
And again, my point is that it's just playing with numbers and concepts, and there's no physical evidence, right? Because obviously I'm not crossing an infinite number of points or my hands would never clap. And that is my entire point, is that we're playing with philosophical concepts that do not necessarily accurately reflect what we know to be true from physical evidence. If we're going to talk about physical properties of the universe, like the universe beginning or not, in any form, then we should be talking about physical evidence. Evidence like
Right.
infinite regresses are impossible don't make any sense at that point.
But
Because
I still don't understand why talking about whether or not. So, for instance, the other thing that would undercut the Kalam, and I think you would agree with this, is if there was physical evidence to show that the universe was eternal, that the universe has been around for an infinite period of time, right?
if there's physical evidence.
Okay, if there's physical evidence for that, then that would undercut the Kalam. But what if, but my understanding then is you're saying that even if you could show logically that it is impossible for an infinite series of events to exist, that just doesn't matter.
State that again. I'm sorry, I got distracted momentarily. My apologies.
No, that's fine. So if there is, so as we said before, what would undercut the Kalam is you're saying if there's physical evidence that the universe is eternal, that would undercut the Kalam, right? We agree on that.
Sure.
Okay. So then I'm coming and I'm saying, so if someone provided a philosophically sound argument that it is logically impossible for an infinite series of temporal events to even occur, that just doesn't matter to you.
No.
Okay.
It's the physical evidence that matters.
On the board.
Because we're talking about a physical universe, right? Because you can't be right for the wrong reasons, right? I don't accept that as true. And I know people disagree on that, and that's fine. But I don't think you can be right for the wrong reasons. And if your reasons for a physical thing aren't based in physics, then you can't possibly be right, even if you guess right. So when those philosophers from the 1600 said that the universe had a beginning, they weren't right. They were lucky. And that's not the same thing, because they only had the philosophical arguments, and what actually proved their philosophical arguments true was physical evidence. And this is the only thing that matters when we're talking about the universe and physics. It's the only thing that can matter, because we can't prove that an infinite regress is impossible in reality. And the conformal cyclical, the triple C, the bouncing model, we don't know if that bouncing model had a beginning or an end, or will have an end. We don't know, right? We need evidence for that. And that evidence, if we ever come up with it, right? And they're finding things that they're saying, hey, this is evidence. A lot more needs to be done. Nothing I'm saying is absolutely true or has risen to the level of theory. It's all hypothesis, and I may use theory incorrectly. But if that bouncing model is true and we find evidence for it, then that might be evidence for an infinite regress. It might not. We don't know, which is my entirely point. We just don't know enough to assume that these are true when we're talking about the entire universe coming into existence.
Okay, so you're saying the triple C model by Penrose, could potentially give us a model of the universe being infinite. And you've said that, well, we just don't know. There's still more data to be done. So then what do we rest on with regards to the most plausible explanation for the existence of the universe? Do we just throw up our hands and say, I don't know? Or do we say, hey, as far as we know right now, it's the standard model?
Yes, that's exactly what we say. We don't know for sure, but as it stands right now, it's a standard model.
Okay.
And that's all we can say.
Do what?
That's all we can say, right?
Okay, and so I'm with you there as far as the standard model goes, as far as saying, hey, as of right now, what is the kingpin is the standard model. Mm-hmm. And so why can't we then look at the standard model and say, okay, well, since the standard model is kind of the only, well, since the standard model is the most prominent, maybe evidentially supported model that we have right now, why can't we draw extrapolations from that model and say, okay, well, seems the universe had a beginning. Premise one on the standard model seems to be true. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. the universe
because
begins to
it's
exist
because
per
it's a
the standard
deductive
model.
argument. It's a
What?
deductive argument, not an inductive argument. If you were to take the Kalam and turn it into an inductive argument, I would agree with you completely. But because you make it a deductive argument, and we cannot conclusively say that the standard model is true, we could only say it's the best explanation we have so far, given the data. That is way too easily to say that premise one is true, because it's not saying premise one is true, right? It's simply saying the best evidence of the data. And we are coming up with, and like I said, one of the papers I reference is actually a paper on the evidence for a previous Big Bang.
No, are you talking about the CCC model by Penrose?
Yeah. Well, that's the model, but some other folks have found in the cosmic microwave background radiation anomalies that they are claiming is evidence of a previous Big Bang.
Right. So, I mean, with regards to that, I don't know if we want to get down into the head counts of the days of the minutia.
No, I'm just saying that
but
I'm just saying, my point is that there isn't enough certainty for a deductive argument. And that's where the problem comes in.
How much certainty do you need for a deductive argument, in your opinion?
I would say you would need to be 100% certain for a deductive argument, because that is the power of the deductive argument, where you say, if all the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. You can't say I'm 90% certain for that, right? Otherwise, what you're saying is, right, if all the premises, the probability of them being true is 90%, then your conclusion is 90%. That's not the deductive argument, right?
So, well, those premises put together, if premise one and premise two are true, then it logically follows that premise three is true. It's that tight argument, right?
Right, and that's just what I said. Yeah,
is certain, but even within the premises of the argument, all those premises have to do is be more plausibly true than their negation. So, for instance, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, right? Yes. So all I have
absolutely no problem with premise one being absolutely true, or premise two, or the conclusion being absolutely true. We have no evidence and no reason to expect evidence to show that we can live eternally.
Right. Unless there's data that comes in that shows that we can't. It would undercut a premise, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So my point is, with regards to the Kalam, that there's not a model currently that we have that undercuts the first premise. There's not an argument that undercuts
all the models we have
that undercuts the evidence that I laid out.
But all the models that we have is hypothetical, with the exception of the Big Bang, which has risen to the level of theory, but our understanding of that only goes to Planck time. And our understanding of the existing universe seems to be true everywhere we've looked, except at black holes. We have problems there. There may be other places we don't know about yet that have other problems with our understanding of physics. So there's enough.
It seems like what you're saying, Jim, is, all right, the standard model has risen to the level of theory. And that's essentially, part of what Craig uses in the Kalam argument. And it kind of seems like you're saying, all right, so the standard model has risen to theory. It indicates, and I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth or not, so let me know. It indicates that it seems to indicate the universe had a beginning. And it's almost like you're saying, I don't like that, so I'm going to go over here and say, well, there are all these other models that could serve as a black swan.
No.
And I'm simply asking, show me the black swan.
Our current understanding is limited to up to Planck time, and we don't know what happened there. We know that all of space-time can. I'll give you. Let me try a different example. At one point, we thought that the entire universe came from a singularity. That has fallen into disfavor.
Say that again.
That the universe expanded from a singularity. That has fallen out of favor as part of the standard model. That is no longer a thing that we think, which is kind of a bummer because then that would mean that something did exist, the singularity. But anyway, but because the general theory of the expansion is true, there's enough things about the beginning that we don't understand, and enough things that we can't understand because we don't have an understanding of physics to know what happened before Planck time. So all we can really say is that we can show and roll back time mathematically, however scientists do it, to Planck time, then we stop.
Okay.
That's not a good enough understanding to say that the universe was created or had a beginning. It might just have been the expansion from the previous collapse.
Okay.
We just don't know.
So then what about what Lincoln says in his book, Many Worlds in One, where that any universe that has been expanding throughout its history must have a beginning?
What's his evidence?
Okay, so
that's my standard question to almost everything you're going to ask about physics.
It's the paper that they gave in 2003 on the Borg-Youth-Vilenkin theorem. And so if that's true, what are your thoughts on that?
If that's true, that changes some things, yes.
Okay.
But again, we don't know that it's true because the theory that we have is still being worked on and then being expanded and at the fringes, where especially the fringe that we're the most interested in, which is the beginning, right? So there's not enough there's not enough evidence at that point because there is none one way or the other, which is my entire point, right? It's just we just don't know, right? And that's where we have to be. Because there's not enough.
I see what you're saying there, but you are saying that if the Borg-Youth-Vilenkin theorem is true, it changes things.
Yes, evidence always changes everything, right?
All right, fair enough. All right.
Can I interject for a moment since we're on the hour mark, or would that mess up
hour 15 mark? I was going to reload
audience questions.
Yeah, we do 15 minutes of audience.
Sure, I got no problem with that.
Okay, cool. So question for Dean. Do you agree that a syllogism has to be valid in form and sound, premises backed up by the evidence?
Do I believe that a syllogism has to be valid in form and sound? Yeah. That's like
backed by evidence was the last thing, and I don't think that backed by evidence is necessarily a definition part of sound. And that normally,
well, it would be part of a deductive argument. So we could show like all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. We would have scientific evidence that would show that Socrates is both a man and Socrates is both mortal.
All right. This isn't.
So I agree with him.
Direct question for Jim, but I think this would be something you could address. There can be no infinite regress. Everything has to start with an uncreated creator, which is eternal, without a beginning and without an end. Something cannot come from nothing.
Prove it. Simple. This is what we're talking about. So how you can ask this in that way after Dean and I have been beating each other up over this very topic. I mean, I'm sorry, go back and listen again and come up with a more specific question, but I'm going to leave it with prove it because that's what we're talking about, unless Dean wants to go a little bit further. Because I think the real answer is listen to what we've just been talking about.
I mean, I'm kind of with Jim on this one. We've been tearing each other's jugular out about it. Just go back and listen to the opening statements, I guess, and the conversation.
Next question, also for Jim. I know you don't think we have certainty for premise one. I'm wondering if you think it is merely probable than not. If not, why?
I don't know how to calculate that probability, so I don't know.
Next question. I don't know
if
who
you
this
said possibility, I'd had a slightly different answer, but it would have been funnier.
I don't know who this is directed at, but how can a cause exist before Planck time? Cause and effect require a temporal frame. I'm guessing that's at Dean.
So
I'd like to take a stab too. So go ahead, Dean. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, that's fine. how can a cause exist before Planck time? I'm not sure what Brian's getting at here, but I would say that with regards to cause and effect, as far as a temporal frame, it doesn't necessarily follow that the cause or the I might get this wrong, that the cause has to become before the effect. They could take place simultaneously.
Right. And just to riff on what you just said, cause and effect, the way we normally use those words, have a temporal component to them in the way we normally use those words. And you are correct, before Planck time, that temporal connotation that is normally in those words doesn't make any sense. And yet we can still say that X causes Y without necessarily implying temporal, maybe, if that makes sense. The real problem is we don't have language to describe things that happen outside of time or with no time, right? And so we kind of have to pick and choose how we want to interpret and how we want to say. So it's really difficult to explain a concept like cause and effect without time, but that doesn't mean we can't, or that's not possible. It just means we can't express it correctly.
And I think there would also be something called indifferentiated time, where it's not what we call marked time, right? It's not a like dimensional time, so to speak. So yeah. I hope that answers your question, Brian. If not, hit me up on Facebook.
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer.
Got a few more. This is a comment, but it was on something you were saying, Jim, so I don't know if you can clarify. Can someone point me to a logic textbook that justifies this claim that premises need to be known with certainty in order for an argument to be deductive?
No, because the question is slightly wrong. It is that we must be certain of the premises in order for in a deductive argument, the premises must be true in order for the conclusion to be true. In an inductive argument, we can use words like probable. We can even talk about the probability. We can talk about maybe and should and sometimes, and all of these non-certain words. But as soon as you start to apply those words to the deductive argument as a premise, you start running into problems because you can't say the conclusion is certainly true because of that. So it's an implication, to me, it's an implication of the type of the argument. Dean?
I'm just going to leave it alone.
Okay.
Question for both debaters. Can this debate be summed up by enough evidence to believe versus not enough evidence to conclude? If not, why not?
Why is Puck trying to cause trouble? Why is that? I love Puck.
When does Puck not cause trouble?
That's true. Puck's awesome. Now, I think I'll answer that first, if that's okay, Jim.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think this is the fundamental disagreement that Jim and I have. I would say that both Jim and I would be on the side of enough evidence to conclude. It's just I guess it's the difference between the standard of what Jim is saying is enough to conclude and the standard that I'm saying is enough to conclude.
And that ultimately is what it comes down to with belief, right? What is your tripping point on the evidence? Right. Just because I say evidence isn't good enough to conclude this doesn't mean that necessarily that Dean is wrong in saying that there is. So we can disagree on that, and that is absolutely okay. So we don't have to come to an agreement to be friends. We don't have to come to agreement to have fun discussions on this topic. That's the fun of the discussions, right? Trying to find a way to express something in a way that someone is willing to accept. And so we can have very different standards of proof. And we see that around us all the time, right? You tell me the chicken crossed the road, I'm going to believe you. Why? There's zero consequence to that. But if you tell me that all immigrants are rapists, well, Now you need some evidence. Both for
I
and against.
have a problem with that statement too, just for the record.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you don't, right?
I know.
But now I need evidence both for and against, right? I need to look at both sides of that question. So I'm better off taking the default of I don't know or the default prove your premise true in that case. So the more severe the consequences, the more evidence you need. And sometimes, in this case, I honestly don't care. The Kalam does not get you to a God. It doesn't get you anywhere interesting. It just gets you to the universe has a beginning.
Now you're just hurting my heart, Jim.
Pardon?
Now you're just hurting my heart.
It gets you to a statement that is essentially the chicken crossed the road. So it's fun to debate, but it's not going to change. I don't think the answer to this question would change Dean's view on ethics or mine, or what he's going to eat tomorrow, or what I'm going to eat tomorrow, or whether or not we, want to drive electric cars or gas cars. I don't think it's going to make any difference to either of us, one way or the other, ultimately, for this particular, which is one of the reasons why I really don't like this argument. It gets you nowhere.
Well, obviously, I'll just agree to disagree with Jim on that. So, are there any other questions? Because if they're not,
one more.
Go ahead.
I know you need a break, but crap, where did it go? Well, actually, do you want to take a break now? If this is going to Jim?
Yeah, just give me the cliff notes when I get back.
Okay. All right.
Jim answers to this question.
Okay, I'll do
No, that is deductive.
Okay, so it seems Jim, it seems like Jim wouldn't be able to tell if the following form of argument was either inductive or deductive. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P. Am I misunderstanding him?
No, that is deductive.
Okay.
Right.
Hopefully
so
that
again, for me, when you start using words, and I call them weasel words, and I kind of sort of mean it as an insult and kind of sort of don't. But when you start using like maybe and could and should, when you start talking about probability, you're no longer in that realm of deductive arguments, because it's true 90% of the time. If premise one is true 90% of the time and premise two is right 90% of the time, then the conclusion is right 90 times 90 is 1.8 or whatever it is, right? Whatever the math works out on probabilities. And I'm a computer programmer because I get the computer to do my math. I don't do it in my head. But that's not what a deductive argument says. A deductive argument should never be the conclusion is right 90% of the time. Right? The conclusion should be it is always right. And this is also why I think the deductive arguments aren't the most useful tool in the world. They're a powerful tool, but they're not the most useful, because there are so many places we simply can't use that deductive tool. So before we go on to the next question, Ethan, don't you have something going on here pretty soon of major import?
That's exactly what I was going to have a little intermission for, so I could play a short video for the audience, because February 4th is the year anniversary of my channel, and I'm using that as an opportunity to raise money for recovering from religion. So for this short minute-long commercial break, check out all the great names that we have joining the fight. I don't know about everyone else, but I am super excited for that event. I don't know if you saw the list of names, but that's over 30 atheist and Christian YouTubers. This is like one of the biggest atheist YouTube streams there is, and I'm freaking excited to be a part of it. I think Dean and Jim have finished with their bathroom break. Dean, did you get a good tinkle in?
Bro, I went to get coffee. You act like I'm like 75 and am struggling.
Well, you did say you're like, well, like halfway through the debate, I might need to go to a bathroom break.
Because of my back, bro.
That's actually why I stand, because I have back issues. Like I have this, in my old age, I have this spine issue. Old age.
Old. Get off
I knew
my
Jim was coming after me for that.
You child.
Infant.
I'm over 50 for those who are wondering, so I can call him that.
There you go.
So
old age.
Yeah, I'm
You haven't even started aging yet.
I have started aging, trust me. I'm older than I look, although I will not disclose my age. It's a trade secret. Whatever age you think I am, add 10 years to it.
So you're 20.
He got you there. He got you there. He got you there.
All right. Are you guys ready for round two?
Sure, let's roll.
Yeah.
Before you both start, I did have one question. In the comment section, I saw the black swan fallacy get thrown around a lot. Could one of you explain what that is?
Go ahead, Jim. I've talked enough.
Yeah. So if you, and this is actually this comes from actually a piece of history where Europeans thought that all swans were white. This was simply a fact. And then a bunch of Europeans went to Australia, I believe, where they found a black swan, turning the entire thing on the head. And all it took was seeing one black swan, not a flock, not hundreds of flocks, just one black swan to prove that not all swans are white. And that is what the black swan fallacy is. Did I get it correct? Or is there a more formal definition?
No, I think what you've just given is pretty solid.
I tend to work more on working definitions than I do formal ones, but the formal ones all have places. I am just mentally lazy on occasion.
We're all lazy at times.
Yes.
Also, for those who aren't aware, every Tuesday I host a call-in show where we tackle not just the supernatural, but conspiracy theories and aliens. That's every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time. So that is tomorrow. And my co-host, who was willing to do it last minute, is Martin Robert. And then Thursdays, if you're looking for a break from regular atheist content, Hannah Vaughn and I host a show on dating, relationships, and sex. This last Thursday, we did ADHD and relationships. And then every Sunday, I work with Jenna Belk on another channel. It's called the Ethan and Jenna Show, where every week we tackle a new topic around mental health. Gentlemen, feel free to just pick it back up. Wait. It'll be like UFC style. Let's get it on.
Well, I hope I'm not Conor McGregor, you know.
Whoops.
I think you are, Dean.
I slipped into a diamond from Lafayette, Louisiana. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I started last time, so why don't you start this time?
Okay,
Dean?
cool. So, Jim, you said earlier that dealing with philosophical arguments about infinities is kind of just, it doesn't matter. It's kind of a waste. So I want to kind of approach that from maybe a different angle, maybe something that maybe might taste better for you. So
could I correct you on just one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Philosophical arguments on physics, on physical things, right? Things that can be better explained by physics are useless.
Okay.
And I do want that qualifier because I don't think that philosophy in general is useless, but just on things that are better explained by science, and not just physics, but science. So philosophy on the mind and the nature of the mind, should really defer to the evidence we're collecting as we study the mind. But yeah,
Okay.
so with regards to
But
scientific,
you wouldn't deny that those things are underpinned by philosophy, would you?
no,
Okay.
I
All right,
don't.
just making sure.
Philosophy is the root
Make
of.
sure we're not in that corner, because then it will be a really
Then I would have problems. Yeah, then I would have problems.
Okay. So I guess my next question would be about the second law of thermodynamics. If the second law, holds, right, and the universe is a closed system, and I know there's conversation there.
Not closed. It's an. I got called on this once. It's an isolated system.
Isolated.
Not closed.
Sorry.
They mean
So
two
let's say
different things.
It's an isolated system.
And I was being pedantic for the commenters down over here, not for you and I.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Listen, it's all good. We're all part of the game. We all get that.
Right.
So let's say, the universe is an isolated system. It seems to me that the second law states that in an isolated system, things move towards, and I know that's super general, but things move towards equilibrium. That over a course of time, heat, death, cold, dark, dilute, things like that. And so I guess my question would be, with regards to the universe's eternality as opposed to it being finite in the past, if the second law is true, then doesn't it it seems to raise the question, then if we've had an infinite amount of time, then why hasn't the universe already run out of or reached equilibrium, heat, death, things like that? It seems to me that if that's the case, then that's a good argument for the universe being finite in the past.
So I agree that, obviously, just again to be pedantic, because I see Blazing Wizard Pope over there, the current local presentation of the universe appears to have a beginning. Why don't we see the bounding universe? If that's true, why hasn't that resolved into, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, I want to make sure you agree with my paraphrase, why hasn't that devolved into an equilibrium state? Right? Because that would
explain to me, just for my clarification, what do you mean by bounding universe?
Well, the triple C, where the universe is constantly expanding and contracting.
I guess my point would be on the standard model.
Okay,
right?
On the standard.
That's kind of what.
Well, the standard model does not show that time is infinite, right? The standard model says that time and space had a beginning, that space-time had a beginning.
Right. So, and I guess that's my question. Like, if the second law of thermodynamics holds in the standard model, which has been elevated to theory, then doesn't that show that the universe is not infinite in the past, but it is finite in the past?
Up to Planck time, yes.
Well, what about, I guess my question, okay, then my follow-up question would be, what about Planck time would undercut the implications of the second law?
We don't know, which is the whole point, right? We can only, the laws of physics appear to apply to the best of current physicist knowledge up to Planck time. We don't know anything that happens before then.
So then you wouldn't say that
before then even makes sense, right?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Or if before then even makes sense, because that's the point where space-time comes into existence.
Okay. So then you're saying we're not within our scientific, and maybe I'll go a little bit more blunt. We're not within our scientific or intellectual rights to say that we could make that extrapolation into Planck time with the second law.
Yes. I would definitely say that we don't have a degree of certainty with which to calculate a probability of that even being true, right? And the other thing too is that we're talking about space-time, and I don't know that there's necessarily, my understanding of the science, and it could be completely wrong, is that because space-time came into existence at the same time, that there's not necessarily even a violation of the second law of thermodynamics because the equation balances out.
So,
And if I understand the problem correctly, the equation balances out because of dark matter, which is matter we're not sure what it is or what it's
right.
made of or how it works, right? It's a variable term, right? We could stuff all kinds of things into the words dark matter.
Right.
But it takes that dark matter to, as I understand it, balance the equations.
Okay. So you're saying that, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that the second law wouldn't apply because the second law doesn't
It's not violated. It doesn't appear, it may not be violated.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So, well, I'll let you ask a question. I've asked enough questions about the second law. Go ahead.
So I guess why does an argument like the infinite regress have any bearing on this topic at all?
Right, because I think when you look at the Kalam and he says whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. If the second premise is undercut through the scientific data that you could show that an actual infinite of temporal events is possible, then I think it would clearly show that the second premise would be undercut, and then essentially the Kalam is off the table, right? So if you can show that an actual infinite regress of temporal events is possible, then I think you've got the Kalam has problems. So
is
that what you mean?
Falsifiable? Yeah, but is that falsifiable?
I think it could be falsifiable if you could show that the universe has a beginning, then it would falsify the idea that the universe is eternal.
Would it? Just because, so the universe may have a beginning, it does not have an eternal past, but couldn't it then have an eternal future?
Right, and that's what we would call a potential infinite, not an actual infinite, right? Those are two different terms.
But you're still just playing with, but you still don't have evidence, right? That it's either possible or impossible. And there's no real way that we're aware of at the moment to construct that evidence. So
you said I don't have evidence for which
for either that purely from a infinite regress and dealing with infinities however you want to, right? The only evidence we have for an infinite, because infinity is a concept, right? It's not a number, it's a concept, and sometimes they treat it as a number. But
in set theory there are infinite sets of things, right, that they use for set theory. So I wouldn't say that it's just a concept, right? It's in the realm of mathematics. It's not just something I think. Well, I guess I know what you mean. It's something that we think about, right? Okay. Right. And I would agree with you. I think the infinite is just something that we think about that I don't think could be instantiated in the real world.
All right. So do you think that the 1600s Islamic philosophers were right when they said the universe has a beginning using only their math with infinity?
Right. So this is actually a point where Jim and I are going to agree. I completely agree that up until about the 1900s, there was no scientific data that would suggest that the universe had a beginning. And so the Islamic philosophers were correct in their philosophy with regards to the issues of the infinite. But what further verified their arguments about the infinite was the support from the scientific data. So I agree with you. I think they were right in their philosophy in the 1600s or whatnot, or the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s. But could you say that they were that their philosophy was empirically verified in the 1100s? No, I don't think that science was around yet.
Yeah, because right, and it wasn't, and that's kind of my point, is that they were right by accident. They had no evidence other than what they thought was correct about the infinite that they said. So they weren't really correct. And I think going back to, philosophy is the root of science,
right?
But it's also a specialization of philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And so they were generalists and then were right because the specialists came in and said yes. And this is kind of where I have a problem with using a more general to prove the specific, right? A more general how do I want to say this? To go from a more general place to a more specific place is much more difficult, right? To start with a more general topic and prove a more specific topic from that general topic is much, much more difficult to do than to go the other way, right?
No, I see what you're saying there. And I guess
I'm not saying that right, so I may have to clarify half a dozen times.
No, that's perfectly okay. So I guess the point that I would ask in response is, when you mentioned about the philosophy versus the scientific, or in concordance with the scientific, are there things that we can know philosophically to be true, that we are well within our rights to operate on a daily basis, that aren't necessarily empirically verified?
So when you say operate on a daily basis, could you clarify that a little bit? Because I think
like
I'm going to
everyday, I guess more like our everyday experience, right? So for instance, maybe an example would be that I can't show empirically that the past was created 5 seconds ago with the appearance of age.
Okay.
But philosophically, I'm well within my rights to say it's more plausible than not that that's not true.
I don't know. Well, I don't say you're saying that philosophically. I think you're still basing that on the evidence, right? We don't really have a way to test if the universe was created 5 seconds ago, and the evidence we have suggests that it's not. So I think I agree with you, but I wouldn't consider that a philosophical argument. I would
Would you consider it a philosophy of science issue?
No.
Okay.
I'm not sure what philosophy of science actually.
Okay, maybe another one would be, let me try another stab at it. So for instance, I don't, and I might be wrong here, you correct me. I don't know that you could show that let me think of one. So we're well within our rights to philosophically operate on the basis of the laws of logic, but the laws of logic can't be empirically identified, right?
Well, so this is, I think, where we're going to disagree.
Okay.
I think the laws of logic are descriptive.
Okay.
The law of identity appears to hold true, although there are some rather interesting issues, right? Now, the bronze statue thought experiment, right? And that is where I've got a bronze statue of Thor. That is A, I melt him down and make a bronze statue of Zeus. Is that still A? Right? And if it is, then we've got some problems with the law of identity, right?
Right.
And that, I could get into some software engineering stuff if anybody really wants to be bored with identity. Bored or drunk. If you're drinking enough to make it interesting, I'll go into it. But that's a problem, right? And so it appears, and it describes a case where I have not added or subtracted any bronze, right? It's the same bronze. But then we get into that identity. So I think that the laws of logic are descriptive, and they appear to hold true and have appeared to hold true for whenever they were created by whichever society created them first, which we're Westerners, so we think the Greeks, but the Chinese and the Indians both have good shots at it too, right? In different forms. So I think that this is exactly, it's describing the world around us, right? And that is what we attempt to do in many cases. So I do agree with that, but I'm not sure that we come from exactly the same.
Well, in general, okay, then let me see this, because I run out of examples off the top of my head.
Okay.
So would you say that as a general principle, that there are things that we can operate on that are philosophically true, even though that they're not empirically verifiable? I think that's a possible case.
Yeah, I think there is a possible case for that,
Okay.
and I think that operating on ethical principles is one of those cases. And you and I are going to disagree on this ethics, on the ethics thing, and I don't want to go down that road. But I think that, just using it as an example. Well, let me recorrect. I want to go down that road, not on this show.
Gotcha.
We'll reserve that for another topic if you want. But, so there are things like that where we can do that. We also, well, it is possible that, and so let me give you an example from my own life. I used to, in another life, be a radar technician for the Army. We fixed Hawk continuous wave. I was a Hawk continuous wave radar repairman, and Hawk is an anti-aircraft missile system. And my buddy and I were getting ready to go work on that we're in training. We're getting ready to go do an exercise. And he turns to me and says, "I'm going to curse our radar." And I was like, "Okay, fine." He said a bunch of words that sounded vaguely Latinish and made some hand motions. We laughed. We turned the radar on, and the dish rotates backwards. Huge grinding noise. And it's shaking. And it's doing all this stuff. And I immediately, because he turned it on, I slapped his hand and turned that thing off as fast as I could. And it never did it again. And everything that we knew about the way that thing was supposed to rotate said it was impossible. Do I operate? Could that have been a quantum fluctuation? Sure. Do I think it was a quantum fluctuation? I have no idea. All I know is Frag Guy cursed a radar and it appeared to work.
It was Ant-Man.
Yeah, or something. I never operated that radar as if it could ever do that again. And if I were to go and turn that thing on today, I would still expect it to work correctly every time. Right. Just because it worked once in a way that is, to our best knowledge, not possible, doesn't mean that it won't do it again. But yeah, I still operate on that. So there are things that we operate on just because it's not probable for something to happen. It's not probable that my car will not start for no reason. Those are the things that I operate on. So yeah, I think there are some things that we could agree that if we go far enough down, that we're not going to expect to have happen.
Okay. Let me see if see if I can ask another question here on my notes. Okay, so so you opened up in your opening statement and you said that the Kalam doesn't get us to God, and you called it a nothing burger.
Yes.
All right. So, 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, what do you mean by it doesn't get us to God? And number 2, what is your definition of nothing in nothing burger? No, I'm just kidding about that.
What would be a fair question,
right? What do you mean it doesn't get us to God? What do you mean by that?
God is nowhere near in the premises, and so God is not in the conclusion. If God is not in the conclusion, how does it get us there?
Okay.
So I don't see a path forward from within the argument itself. Right now, if you want to say, well, I can add an argument on top of that, okay, but that is not the Kalam, right? That is the Kalam as a base, and now we're jumping off and doing that.
Okay, so I think this is a shocker. We're going to disagree, right? So here's something that I've talked about before with other friends of mine who are atheists. Where in the philosophical literature, specifically by Craig, do we have this separation between the premises and then what he does as far as the conceptual analysis? Because as far as I know, in 79, when he puts forth the Kalam, the conceptual analysis is part of the Kalam, is part of the overall argument. So unless there's like this, unless there's like the philosophical literature in which someone states, yeah, here's Kalam proper and here's what Craig does over here, then I don't understand why conceptual analysis, one, it can't be considered a part of the argument, and then 2, why we would, and maybe this is a lesser point, why we would split it from like Kalam proper to Kalam extended. Maybe that's just a thorn in my flesh, so to speak.
Well, I would start with, well, my opening did have Craig's little, I don't want to be too insulting, but complete.
Just go for it.
That whole bit that he does at the end there, you and I didn't read that part. When everybody talks about the Kalam, they talk about the 2 premises and the conclusion. And that is that to me is what the argument is. And no, I don't have a problem with a jumping off point or saying based on this, now we can, using the Kalam, those 3 things to jump off and say something else.
Okay.
And I wasn't entirely sure if we were actually going to do that. I did come a little bit prepared to, but that's, that to me is the separate issue, right? Is that the Kalam doesn't get you to a God. You have to add more argument, or you have to have another argument after that based on the Kalam to get you there.
Right. So I guess, and I guess that would be my other point. What's wrong with taking those 3 premises and then doing conceptual analysis? Because it seems like to me, in the same way, like if I were a crime scene investigator, right? I'd walk into the room and based upon the evidence that's there, I can identify whether this scene is an accident, a suicide, or a homicide. I have to walk into the room and use conceptual analysis. I say, premise 1, there's
right. You're saying the evidence points to a homicide, and now you're going to go and say, well, who did it?
Right.
Right. So you answer the first question, and then you have another question after that.
Right. And so that's how I would look at the Kalam. The Kalam is saying, here is X, right? And I guess it would be then the point that Craig takes is, now that we have X established, the question is, who done it? Right.
And to continue with your example, so the crime scene techs go in, they analyze the evidence, and they go, this is murder, and they hand that off to detectives. or they say this is suicide and they do whatever they're supposed to do with the suicide, or this is an accident, they call the coroner and go on, right? There's two separate phases to all three of those things. And while for the case of the murder, we would consider that all one case, and I don't really have a problem with that, they are two different phases. And that's really all that I'm saying.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
Phase one doesn't get us to a God. It doesn't get us to not a God. It doesn't get us to anything other than
a cause.
Conclusion. Right.
I agree with you there. And I hope Antangelo calls in.
I could care less. I won't.
You're muted, bro.
Just so you know,
what is this amateur hour? Is this amateur hour?
Oh, nice burn. Sorry, I'm trying to catch all your fallacies, so I needed to.
Right.
We're going to take audience questions beginning in just under 3 minutes. So you guys got 3 minutes.
Okay. I mean, I really don't. We're going to do audience questions and then we're going to do closing statements, right?
Oh, well, you still got closing statements?
I mean, I thought we were, but we don't have to.
You're the host, bro. You tell me what to do.
But I can't.
I'm just following after the head chief. You just tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can do 5 minutes of closing statements if you want. You want to just jump into audience questions now?
Yeah, let's do that.
Real quick, I want to touch on something, and I also want to give Dean a chance to touch on it as well, to something that Blazing Wizard Pope said before we even got started, and he just said now. And let me just read this real quick. How a Muslim makes something that proves the God of the Bible, wouldn't he try and prove the God of the Quran? What I'd like to point out is that with any logical argument, you can change the subject without necessarily changing the argument or invalidating the argument. This is one of the reasons why you need evidence, right? So Socrates, we could say that Socrates has all men have beards. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates has a beard. Now there is evidence that we assume in these cases, because we've all seen Socrates. We know that Socrates is in fact a man, and we kind of sort of know that all men have beards, except there's some physical exceptions to that as well that I don't want to necessarily get into. But if I change the name to all men have beards, Morgan has a beard, Morgan is a man, do we actually have the same evidence? Because Morgan can work for men or women. And yes, I'm talking CIS right now, just cis men and women. Do we still have that same evidence? Do we assume the same evidence, or do we have to go find Morgan? Right? Because we don't know whether or not Morgan is capable of having a beard. So in this case, yes, an Islamic philosopher coming up with an argument to prove their God, assuming that the God of Islam and the God of Christianity are different, then yes, you could, with evidence, say that that's possible. But it's the evidence that, and again, this is why I go back to evidence, and why we should go back to evidence, is because we can change out the subject of a perfectly valid syllogism and not necessarily invalidate it unless the evidence invalidates it. Dean, do you want to kind of chime in on that same?
Yeah, and I would just say, both in Al-Ghazali's literature and also Craig's literature, that the Kalam is the first step in simply showing that a God in general exists. So whether it's Islamic apologetics from the medieval period, whether it's Craig today, or anybody else that does the Kalam, it's not there to say, evidence for the Christian God or evidence for the Islamic God. It's there to say, all right, a God in general exists. And then you build out your apologetics template, so to speak. You go to things like reliability of the New Testament, historical case for the resurrection, things like that. So in principle, I don't know that I have too much of a disagreement with Jim. So I wanted to add something a little bit new.
Yeah.
Also, before we get to our first question, Jim Barrows, Tina Marie just wanted to say hi. She's a big fan. And,
Oh, hello.
she's all excited. She's like, I'm so jealous you get to talk to Jim. I'm like, yeah, he's a pretty cool dude.
I am actually trying to get on the atheist Discord, atheist community of Discord, excuse me. It used to be the ACA's Discord, but now it's the atheist community of Discord on their server more often and actually talking as well. So
check out Jim being the celebrity and whatnot. Jim gets, I'm so happy that I get to talk to Jim. Why isn't Dean trying to be Muslim 30 minutes before the show comes on?
Quite frankly,
not that I'm crying about it.
In case anybody can't tell, I've been looking forward to this for months. And so, because I love talking to Dean. The first time he showed up at the ACA, you could tell that at the beginning he was a little nervous about walking into the
I thought I was the gazelle and I was walking into a pack of lions and it was going to be a bad day. But they treated me with the utmost respect, and I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was we actually had a Christian apologist in the building, and the hard thing was trying to get everyone to remember that he can't really talk to 10 people at the same time.
Well, that was funny. Like, it was when there was break time, there was like 3 or 4 people each trying to chat, but it was a great time.
Yeah.
It was fun, and I even told Jim before we even got started that I long for the day when, and this is going to sound weird coming from a Christian, but I long for the day when all of you guys are back in the library. That'd be a good day. So that way I can come.
Well, before we take our caller, I will say this. I had always promised that if there is a day where I am converted, I will change the channel name to Your Friendly Neighborhood Christian. But I still have not been converted. So
I may just start up my own YouTube channel called The Friendly Neighborhood Christian just to mess with you.
I would do. I would mess you up.
I forget the name of the gentleman, but I had said that maybe one day we need to set up a discussion between the Daily Apologist and the Daily Atheist.
Oh yeah, Chris Mallard.
Yeah, dude, Chris seems like a cool guy. I've never talked to him.
That would be kind of fun.
Less patient with you than Jim is.
Well, then on second thought, no.
All right, let's get our first caller or question. We have none other than Eric Murphy on the line. Eric, what's going on?
Well, look at the time. I got to go.
Hey guys.
Well, look at the
I
time.
just wanted to fangirl with all my
How you doing, Eric?
here.
What's up?
Hey, this was a great discussion, and I absolutely love it. I miss all of you so much. So, Ethan, thank you for setting this up. Jim and Dean, this was really, really fun to watch. But Jim, if there's anything that you've taught me, it's to let my pedantic flag fly. So I've got to be pedantic with you and take you to task on something.
Uh-oh.
And then Dean?
Yeah.
I got one for you too, buddy.
Oh, boy.
And it's only because
I'm about to pull out my Ethernet cord.
Again?
Dang, that's messed up, Jim.
So Jim, I hear what you're saying about evidence and about when there is evidence, you want to defer to that evidence because that's solid and that's concrete. But why make a distinction between science and philosophy when it appears to me, at least, that science is applied philosophy, same as mathematics?
So let me get pedantic back on you because you're
I get to watch them go at it.
Yeah, you're incorrectly pedantic. So it is specifically evidence is, yes. Evidence is required for science and is king for science and has to be there for science. But science is definitely a subtopic of philosophy, right? Its roots are deeply rooted in philosophy. And other philosophical topics can't rely as much on evidence. But this is what I was trying to say. When you're going from a more general area to a more specific, that it doesn't translate well. And in this case, we're going from general philosophical. I mean, if you go look at the history of science and philosophy, you can see a lot of places where you're just going to keel over laughing because they got it so wrong, because they just didn't have the evidence. So that's why I say that evidence, but it's specific to the topic of the subtopic of science within philosophy.
Okay. I just when I thought I heard a distinction being made between science and philosophy, and don't get me wrong, we're all here because we love navel gazing, and there's no navel gazing like philosophical navel gazing.
Exactly.
Like, I'm gonna get a shirt that says Eric Murphy's top 10 phrases, and we'll put that one near the top.
Yeah.
Honestly, I only really say it when you're around, Dean. I don't know why.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that.
Moving over. I love you, man.
I know.
Question for you, buddy.
Yeah.
You were talking about actual infinites and potential infinites,
Right.
and you were talking about numbers, but the way you were describing numbers was almost in some kind of platonic sense, as if they were nouns. And I'm wondering if, like, when we're talking about the number one, if we're talking about the Sesame Street, pulling up, this is the number one, or if we're talking about it as we use numbers, which is as adjectives, something used to describe a noun. Because if we're talking about set theory, but in that set are a set of adjectives, then we can't treat them as nouns. You know what I mean?
I think I see what you're saying. And I guess my response would be,
like, there is one Dean, and
Right.
and that is true. But if I say one Donald Duck plus two Donald Ducks equals three Donald Ducks, that does not mean that three Donald Ducks exist.
right. But if you said one apple plus one apple equals two apples,
sure,
right? So that's the
Absolutely.
difference in identity.
Using those adjectives, it's just when you try to apply those adjectives as extant things other than descriptors.
Right, I don't know that, and I'm sorry if I did it. I'm not trying to use mathematics outside of anything else other than descriptors.
Yeah, and I didn't take anything you said that way. Eric, how did you come to the conclusion that he was saying that?
There's my pedantic flag.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
It was talking about set theory, and it just struck me that way. But my bad. Either way, I'll let y'all move on to the next caller.
Right.
But
Thanks for calling in, man. I miss you.
And can't wait to see you too.
Yeah, looking for. We need to figure out how to do something virtually together.
We really do. We really do.
And Eric, just before you go, that would be 2 attempts to out pedantic Dean and I failed.
The few what?
2 attempts to out pedantic Dean and I failed.
No, that just means that I'm in good company. And also, no, hold on. I'll come back at you with that. But that's what you're good for, man.
Okay.
You're good at that, Jim. You really are.
I appreciate that. I try to be.
Well, Ethan, thank you for letting me drop by and say hi.
Thanks,
Dean, Jim, you guys rock. Have a great night.
You too.
So I would totally want to take more audience questions, but we're already approaching the 2-hour mark.
Can we go
So
over 2 hours,
I'm cool.
please.
you still
I
wanna-
don't beg, but I'm begging. Please.
Yeah, this is fun.
It's your channel. You can do what you want. People will watch this for 3 hours.
it's kind of a the plus side is we actually don't have any questions or callers right now. We just had the one.
Oh.
Okay.
If someone else wants to call in, or if someone has a question in the chat for Dean or Jim, quickly let us know, or call the number 951-364-2430. It's in the YouTube description. In the meantime, just a reminder to everybody watching, tomorrow is the weekly call-in show, The Perspective, at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, where my co-host will be Martin Robert, and we tackle supernatural claims, belief in aliens, and conspiracy theories. A couple of weeks ago, we had a psychic, and that was a fun one. But most importantly, February 4th is going to be the year anniversary of this channel, and we are doing a fundraiser for Recovering from Religion, and we'll have great names like, I can't include Dean Meadows. No, I'm just sorry. I'm sorry, Dean. No, Dean will be on the list of people, along with Seth Andrews, Aaron Rock, Kenneth Leonard, Genetically Modified Skeptic, Eric Murphy, Vila Bianca, Hannah Vaughn. There's a bunch of names. I don't have them all listed right now. But we still don't have any callers, so we could go into closing statements unless you want to proceed with continuing to talk. I'm fine with either. I mean, but we definitely can't go 3 hours. That's for sure.
Okay. I mean, I guess the only thing that I would, I'll save that for. Is that fair to save that for closing statement? Maybe I'll just ask Jim.
Let's just go ahead and do closing statements, and if somebody wants to call in after we do closing statements, maybe we'll take it.
Right. Okay.
Great idea.
All right. So, do you want to go first, Jim, or you want me to go? Huh?
I don't actually have closing statements prepared, so go ahead. I need to make something up.
I mean, I really don't either. I just got some notes that I jotted down. So in tonight's debate, if you remember, I said that I was going to show that the Kalam is a sound argument on the basis of, the first two premises that lead to, cause. Notice in tonight's conversation, when I presented evidence, or when I, sought to present evidence, Jim gave mere possibilities of other types of models, for instance, but I don't know that I saw Jim say, hey, here's something that, empirically undercuts the Kalam, or not the Kalam, but the standard model. Jim also seems to believe that with regards to premises, the premises have to be 100% true in order for them to be counted supposedly in a deductive argument. And so basically it seems like what Jim said tonight is that if there's a possibility that something is false, that the mere possibility that something could potentially undercut it as a black swan, then I'm not within my rights to accept what we have on the standard model. And also that the mere possibility that there's something in the quantum realm could be an exception to premise one is enough to justify skepticism in the face of all other evidence that we have in favor of it. Also, Jim had mentioned, and I'm actually pleased with this. Jim had mentioned, and he said that, hey, there were some things that Jim conceded tonight. Jim conceded that if the Borg-Vilenkin theorem is true, then that changes things as well. So I'm glad to hear that Jim has said that. And then really, in tonight's debate, Jim didn't really touch the third premise of my argument as far as what is the cause. He simply said it doesn't get you to God, but he never directly objected to the third premise. So I don't think that Jim did what was necessary tonight to undercut the Kalam. I'm sure he vehemently disagrees, but in closing, I think if you go back and watch, if you look point for point, I think that I carried the night, and I appreciate Ethan for having the debate. Jim, I would love to, in some point in the future, either run this conversation back and talk more, or have a completely different conversation.
Absolutely.
It has been, and I don't mean this just to blow smoke. I'm saying it has genuinely been a privilege and an honor to have this discussion with you tonight on Ethan's channel. So with that, as you can probably guess, I conclude the Kalam is still a viable option, and that those who are seeking after the truth should consider it to be a sound argument. And with that, I'll turn the closing argument over to Jim.
All right. So again, when it comes to the subtopic of philosophy that we call science, then we have to rely on evidence, because that's what makes science accurate and true to the degree that we're able to determine it. And while we have evidence that the standard model is true to the degree that science has raised that to the level of theory, there is still a lot of hypotheses around the edges of that, including the single most important edge, which is the beginning, which is what the Kalam is all about, is beginnings. And so we have a problem here in that we simply don't have enough evidence to support the deductive argument, because the deductive argument, the conclusion must be true, capital T true, not probably true, not true to the extent that science is able to determine, because those are all inductive. And honestly, if someone were to come up with an inductive version of the Kalam, I would probably agree that that is the case. But it doesn't get us to a God. If the two premises are true, I don't have to why deal with the conclusion at all? It's obviously cannot follow from the two premises. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that the argument doesn't work. The evidence does not support the argument, which is a completely different thing. The best evidence we have is the current local presentation of the universe had a beginning. But notice what I said. Current best evidence, current local. We have lots of things we simply don't know. And to draw some sort of truth to that, like you can with a deductive argument, because that is the power of a deductive argument, it is true. We can't get there from the premises right now, today. Now, that may change in 1,000 years. That may change tomorrow. We don't know. When that evidence changes, then we have to change our conclusions, and we have to change our arguments, and we may have to accept arguments that we don't like. And it's not that I don't like the Kalam. It doesn't get us to a God. It gets us to a place where you can go, well, if the universe began, something began it, but we don't know what. We don't know if it was the Christian God. We don't know if it was the Islamic God, if you accept it as true that those two are different, and not everybody does. It doesn't get us to Zeus. It doesn't get us to the crab god. It doesn't get us to the flying spaghetti monster. And it doesn't even get us to a natural explanation. It doesn't even get us to any other possibility. It simply stops with the universe at the beginning. And so we have to build on that. And if you're going to build on something that starts in physics, then you should build on it with physics. And so we should be looking for more evidence, because that's what we do with science, is we look for evidence, and that is what is king. And if our evidence is not 100% true, we're on dangerous ground by simply assuming that it is true with the deductive argument. It may not be the case that the black swan fallacy, when it comes to swans, has consequences. But I think that if we start concluding that there is in fact a God or a creative or an intelligent mind behind it, or anything else you want to say along those lines, that does have consequences. And so we need to reserve judgment until we can see it. And we're okay assuming false until proven otherwise, as long as we're not stating that it is in fact false, because then we've got a burden of proof as well. So no, I don't think that he has proven it to the degree that he needs to in order for the conclusion to hold true. We have lots of things that we don't know yet, and there's lots of things that we need to know in order to have 100% confidence, like I think the deductive argument needs, because I know of no deductive argument that isn't 100% true. So that's it for me.
All right, thank you. All right, let's get to questions real quick. Coming from Lionheart. Question for Dean. Doesn't the B theory of time mean that the universe always existed?
Right. And so I think that's a really great question by Lionheart, because I would say that one of the things that does hinder the Kalam a little bit is Craig's insistence on the A theory of time. Now, just to kind of keep it short, sweet, and to the point, I think if you recalibrated what Craig means by begins to exist, so let me just put it this way. Craig's technical definition, which I had at the end of his, let me just read it real quick. He says that X begins to exist at T if and only if X begins at T. X comes into being at T if and only if 1, X exists at T, and the actual world includes no state of affairs in which X exists timelessly. 2, T is either the first time in which X exists or is separated by an interval during which X does not exist. And 3, X's existing at T is a tense fact. Now, in my thesis for Biola, and if Lionheart wants that, make sure he can message me on Facebook or send me an email at djmeadows87@gmail.com. I will send him my thesis, and what I do there is I seek to show that the Kalam can hold even on a B theory of time. And so I don't think that even if you have a B theory, that the universe is necessarily eternal. So that's my 2 cents. If I wanted to really answer that question, I'd have to go through my whole thesis, and I really don't want to go through 42 pages on your show right now.
Oh, I would appreciate that. All right.
Great question by Lionheart.
Next question is for, oh crap, where did it go? Jim Otangelo would like to know if you want to debate him on the origin of life.
No, I have never heard Otangelo speak as an honest interlocutor. And what I mean by that, he always preaches he's not interested in a debate. I have zero interest in talking to somebody who only wants to preach.
No, that makes sense. If anyone has any other questions, quickly put them in the comments. I actually have a question for each of you. So, Jim, I'm going to start with a question for you. There are many people who will say that Christianity is helpful to them and has made their life better. If it does make their life better and makes them happier, what's the harm in believing in it?
Well, if I would ask, what exactly is it about Christianity that makes your life better? I think the concept of giving your problems to God, that concept of just kind of letting them all go is helpful. But you don't have to give them to God. You can just let them go, right? It's the same thing. There's no difference. So I would look at what is it, and then point out that there's no God involved. And wouldn't your life be better if you were looking at things that were true? Not necessarily that made your life better, because sometimes the truth is hard and it allows you to make hard questions or hard decisions from hard questions. So, it's great. It makes your life better. But, Christianity has been used as an excuse to do horrible, horrible things over the years. And in many cases with Christian on Christian violence. That is kind of the problem that I have, is that once you start, and the danger with my statement is that there is a slippery slope fallacy that needs to be avoided, but there is a danger. And once you start accepting one thing as no longer true, then you can start to build all kinds of really, really bad decisions on that. For instance, if we accept as true and without evidence the claim that all immigrants are criminals, then you can justify all kinds of really, really bad things based on that statement. And that's problematic. That is always going to be problematic. And so we should always look at what is true and not what is convenient or pleasant, because those don't always lead us to good outcomes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dean, question for you. I myself am not just a philosophical layman, but consider myself a layman overall. When I hear the Kalam, to me, it is, for example, like an assertion without evidence. And what I mean by that is, if I want to see how a cell phone works, I can take it apart. If I want to see how 5G technology works, I can go to a diagram and read all about it. If I want to see how gravity works, I can pick up my pen and drop it. Why is this not the same for God?
Why is what not the same for God?
Why is there no more reliable or way to test God in any capacity?
Right. So I think, to kind of answer your question, maybe in 2 parts or 3 parts. I think that one, you maybe have begged the question against personal religious experiences of others, which obviously we don't have the time to talk about now. But I think an argument, I think in that realm, I think there has been work here in the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years, where some philosophers of religion, some theologians have done some solid work on shoring up the argument from religious experience. And so if some of those things are true, then I think that that would be an argument for people having that which you've just kind of raised as an objection, that that interaction with God. So I wouldn't, matter of factly state that it's, kind of how you put it. But I also think that the other, I don't want to say prejudice, that might be too hard, but I guess the best word to use is prejudice. I think the other prejudice might be that we're perfectly within our rights, I think, intellectually, to accept inductive arguments, abductive arguments, just as well as deductive arguments and empirical data. So that would be how I would answer the question with regards to the existence of God.
Okay. I have so much I want to say, but I can't. Dean and Jim, you both have been awesome. I think this has been a really great discussion, and I appreciate you both taking the time out of your day to come here and do this.
I had a blast.
Had fun. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Good. Dean, I hope you felt welcomed on this atheist platform and I was fair to you.
Always do.
Good. Jim, where can everyone check you out at?
Well, you can catch me on the Atheist Experience. I'm on about roughly every 4 weeks. It depends on what we have going on. Like this time it was 5 weeks between appearances. I am also on the nonprofits much more regularly than I am there. And then I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. And I think you posted my link tree to those. I do have a YouTube channel, but if you follow it, you're going to be incredibly disappointed because I don't put anything on there, although I am thinking about changing my mind on that. But yeah, don't follow it just in case. I will announce when I do that for you guys. And then I'm also occasionally, much less occasionally, on the Atheist Community of Discord server. And that is pretty much the only Discord server that I'm ever on regularly. So
awesome. Everyone, if you enjoyed the content, make sure you like and subscribe. I also need to thank my patrons: Jonathon, Friedel, Cindy PLAZA, Kenneth, Leonard, Kathy, Letto, JumpandShoot, Ian, Oz, Philip, Leitch, and Katilyn Beyond. All of you are awesome, and I appreciate your patronage very much. It helps continue to improve this channel. I'll be back tomorrow night with The Perspective at 7 p.m. Then again with Hannah Vaughn on Thursday at 9 p.m. with Sex, Dating, and Relationships. And then Sunday, the Ethan and Jenna show, which is on mental health. And Jim, if you ever need help getting your YouTube started or have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to help because
Jim, you should totally do a YouTube channel.
We do. We need more atheist voices, Jim. And you are a great voice. I love listening to you on XP. I love you great, and I'd love to see you doing more. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful week. Crap. Wrong video.